Hi everyone, my name's Amelia. I'm part of the team here at Seneca, and this is my colleague Ruth and obviously our amazing guest speaker Rose. So really great to have you all here. We're very excited, particularly to hear Rose speak. We'll give everyone a couple minutes just to trickle in because we know it's sort of school kicking out time, so give everyone a couple of moments, but we'll get started shortly. Just a bit on the kind of agenda of this afternoon. We'll sort of introduce ourselves in a bit more detail in a moment, and then I'll hand over to Rose for the main event, and Rose will talk for about 40 to 45 minutes, after which time we'll have about 15 minutes left for a Q&A. During the session, you'll see there's already been a bit of conversation in the chat. Please do put any questions that come to mind in the chat at any point. I'll be keeping an eye on everything so that any kind of immediate questions I can get back to, but also then I can ask Rose questions that come up at the end. So yeah, we'd love to hear from everyone. And while we've got you for a moment, if you want to introduce yourself, we've got Jay Tomlinson from Chesterfield. Super. Yeah, let us know who you are, where you're watching from. It's great to get to know who we've got with us.
And just so you know, this session will be recorded, so you can watch it back afterwards on the YouTube link, or send it to colleagues in your school who can't make it today.
And we'll also send that back out to you as well after the session. Perfect. All right, we'll get started in a moment. Just to briefly introduce myself, and then I'll let Rose introduce herself and take it away. I'm Amelia, like I mentioned, I'm part of the team here at Seneca, work with a lot of our schools who use Seneca either in the free or paid capacity. And then my colleague Ruth, similarly. Ruth, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Ruth. I work for Seneca. Prior to that, I used to work in schools, so teaching and leading some schools. Most of you who've done MIS integration will have seen emails from me at some point, but it's nice to be here this afternoon.
Super. And with that, we'll hand over to you, Rose. I'll just add your presentation.
Lovely. Thank you, Amelia. Thank you, Ruth. And thank you so much for inviting me, and lovely to meet you, and lovely to be giving this talk today. I hope you find it useful and practical, and that maybe it will demystify a little bit about AI. I've realized that slide has started a bit early, so let me just go back to the first slide. There we go. That's because I was testing it earlier. Apologies about that. So how AI will shape education now and in the future. There's a lot to cover, obviously, and so this is relatively superficial, but I hope it will give you a sense of AI, what it can do now, and the way things are looking as if they're heading. And I'm very happy to take questions, as Amelia's already said. And also, I'm very happy for people to email me if there's questions you think of afterwards, because you don't always think of the question you want to ask at the time. So what is AI? There are many, many different definitions. And for the expert in AI, this would be perhaps too simple a definition, but I think it's a very useful definition for now. So technology capable of actions and behaviors requiring intelligence when done by humans. So if we were seeing a human behave in this way, we would consider it to be intelligence. It's quite broad. And I think it's really useful to think about the history of artificial intelligence. And I've divided it into two parts on two slides. So the first part, which is really pre the millennium, is very much about what we call good old-fashioned AI. And the key difference between good old-fashioned AI and more modern AI is that good old-fashioned AI can't learn. So it's written, the program that creates the AI is written in advance, and once it's written, the AI can't learn to do anything different. Whereas more modern AI that uses machine learning is AI that can learn. And that's a significant difference. There are advantages and disadvantages to both. But basically, where did AI start? And it's really hard to pinpoint it because, for decades and centuries even, as humans, we've loved to create images of ourselves that behave. You think about early automata. And then the first use of the word robot that I could find, and of course not all robots are intelligent and not all AI is robots, but we kind of think of robots as being part of AI, is actually in a play by a Czech playwright called Karel Čapek, and it was very much a dystopian future where the robots took over the world. Resonate with some of the discussions at the moment? And in 1940, Norbert Wiener started the field of cybernetics, and that was looking at how you studied control and communication in animals so that you could then replicate it in machines. In 1950, there was a very famous paper by a mathematician called Alan Turing. You may have heard of the Turing test. Alan Turing was a code breaker in the war, and he came up with a paper called Can Machines Think? And the Turing test, which was about, could we be made to believe that an AI was a human because of the way we interacted with it? Could it pass the Turing test? But I think the real birth of modern AI was in 1956 at a meeting of 12 scientists, all of whom were male, at Dartmouth College in the US, where they felt they could investigate and potentially automate every aspect of human cognitive behavior. We're a long way from that now, and yet in 1956 they thought in over a summer they could make significant progress. I think we've learned a lot about how much longer it takes than that to build AI. And then we really started in 1957. Somebody called Rosenblatt came up with what's really the first neural network. And neural networks are modern AI. These are the systems that learn. But we often don't think of those systems as really taking hold until the 2000s. But in actual fact, the idea was born back in 1957. So there's a long history here. In the 60s, we had our first chatbot. It was very basic. In the 70s, we had a lot of expert systems, particularly in medical diagnosis. But all of these were systems that used rules or statistical methods. And I think the real high point of this was 1997, when IBM built a machine called Deep Blue that beat Garry Kasparov, the then world chess grandmaster at chess. And that was like a big, big success story for the world of AI. And then came quite a winter, because people working in AI, and I was working in a computer science and AI department at the time, thought, well, we've built a machine that can play grandmaster level chess. We've cracked intelligence. Intelligent people play chess, therefore. And then there was a huge realization that actually things that we take for granted as humans, the intelligence of vision, were far harder to automate than playing chess. And it's only really in relatively recent times that we've really built sophisticated AI visual systems. So there was quite a winter after that, because there was a huge expectation after that chess playing computer, and then a bit of a, oh, this is much harder than we thought. And so over the 2000s, we had increased use of machine learning AI. So these are systems that can learn, with different types of neural networks being created. Somebody called Fei-Fei Li creating the first large data set that allegedly reflected the real world. That should really be with quotes, because it was very, very minimal. And we had some interesting advances that I think people will recognize. Apple integrates Siri into the iPhone in 2011. That was a very sophisticated AI system, because it had to understand what the user was saying using natural language processing in order to be able to then work out how to respond. We then had a system called Eugene that passed the Turing test in 2014. Amazon launched Alexa in 2014. And then one of the other groundbreaking moments in AI history was 2017, when Google DeepMind's AlphaGo beat the world champion at the game of Go. And that was the first really deep neural network. So that means this is a network with lots of layers, and the deeper the layers, the more sophisticated the learning the machine can do, the more accurate, the faster, the more sophisticated. And I think we could say that the release of ChatGPT in 2022 is another watershed moment in AI. And yet the technology behind ChatGPT, the large language model, has been around since 2018, in the same way that the neural network idea dates back right till 1957. So there's a long history of AI, which I think it's easy to forget at times such as the present, when something like ChatGPT comes along and captures everybody's interest. But there's a long history, as I say, and it's important to remember that. Just think about, are you using AI at the moment? You probably are. Predictive text on your phone, that's AI. Grammarly, Otter, which is a system that transcribes as you speak. Email assistants, if you use those. Image search, obviously ChatGPT and the other generative AI systems, like Dolly or whichever flavor you might be using. Digital voice assistants, like Alexa, like Siri. Text-to-speech tools or vice versa. I use transcription a lot, just speaking into my phone to write a note, because it's quicker if I'm on the move than me using the keyboard on the phone. That's AI. And a lot of translation tools as well. And of course, ChatGPT is a very useful translation tool. So there's a lot of AI out there, and you're probably all using it. So how can AI be used in education? Well, there's certainly plenty of systems out there that can be used to provide individualized support. These are just a couple of examples. They're British companies, Century Tech and Tassami. So these are systems that use AI to adapt to an individual learner's needs, to meet their needs by giving them support, by varying the complexity or the difficulty of the type of tasks they're asked to complete. And then we have systems that can recommend, based on data, what should happen with this group of students, what kind of resources a teacher should use. And then we have systems that can sense behaviors, because AI can analyze multiple different sources of data and learn from it. And this is really important in terms of the sophistication of the sorts of AI tools that will be coming our way. So if you can imagine taking speech data, data about somebody's movement, data about their eyes, where they're looking, what they're doing, as well as what they might be entering in a computer using a touch screen or a keyboard, and think about all these different sorts of data, as well as data that might be historical about that user, bringing all that together and then learning from that data. You can see how we can develop quite sophisticated systems. These are just a few examples of systems that use multiple sources of data and then either provide advice or recommend. One particular system that I think is quite interesting to think about is this system, which was released at the University of Southern California, that's called SimSensai. And it's a system that uses real-time data as well as historical data to analyze a student who's receiving counselling from a virtual counsellor. And you can see the lady sitting in the chair. So this is an AI system that's learnt from historical data about students needing counselling support, that's then complemented by data that's gathered as the student is sitting in front of the computer. And it's data about the student's voice, because they talk to the counsellor, speed, pace, gaps. It's data about their facial expressions, all being used to try and analyse their state. Maybe they're anxious, maybe they're not, and then feeding that into the interactions that the virtual counsellor has. But what I think is really interesting about this is just look at the date on that paper, 2014. This is nearly 10 years ago that we've had this technology. So these really sophisticated systems have been around for a while. So what's new at the moment and what's sparked so much interest is that those systems, some have been around for longer than others, are all systems that are only used by relatively small numbers of people. Some of them you need to pay for, and so there's a cost involved. So what happened when ChatGPT was launched last autumn was that for the first time ever, we had scaled, sophisticated AI that was freely available and with a really easy to use interface. And that's what's really different. The underlying technology, as I say, is not so new, but the scaled, freely available nature of it is. And so what's really changed is that we now have access to huge amounts of data. As I've said, you can collect data about people's speech, and it's not just what they're saying, it's how they're speaking, their tone, the pauses, about movement, about the way we're interacting with each other, with technology. There are vast amounts of data being collected all of the time, and modern machine learning AI learns from data. So data is supremely important to modern AI. We've got much more powerful computers that can process that data, and we've got very sophisticated AI systems that process that data using these powerful computers. A lot of it is now easily available for people who, wherever they have an internet connection and some technology to use. And it means that human-like behaviors by machines are becoming increasingly accessible. But what does that mean for education? What's the promise that AI brings to education? Well, I think personalized learning for all students is certainly part of the offer. Reduced teacher workload, again, part of the offer. Improved equity in education, part of the promise. Fast creation of high quality content. But these things won't happen automatically. And if we want these things to happen, we need to think very carefully about how we use these AI tools. And in particular, and I've written about this a lot, I believe passionately that AI should never replace human teachers, because it cannot do the rich variety of things that a human teacher can do, but it can be very useful. So how can it be used in education? It can be used to tackle some of the big challenges, as I said, personalization, so individual learning paths, next steps, feedback. We all know how important feedback is to learning. Learning assessment, so adaptive systems assess learners as they progress, and they can feed that information back to teachers. Generation of teaching content, worksheets, activities. Always need to have human oversight, always need to check, because these generative AI systems can produce errors, but they can certainly save you a lot of time. And as long as you think of them as being an incredibly fast assistant that may not get everything 100% right, so you just need to check, they can be super useful. If you think about virtual reality and augmented reality then being augmented by AI, you can think about virtual classrooms, and you can think about automated assistants in the form of more sophisticated chatbots than we've had to date. So lots of interesting possibilities. And so we can think about these tools as being tools that can help bring about equity, as I've said. We can use them for student and staff well-being, student engagement, staff recruitment and retention, access to quality education for all. Thinking about making these tools available to anybody with an internet connection and a piece of technology gives us the promise of providing education to students who don't have a human teacher. So, and an AI assistant would be better than not having a teacher at all. So there's lots of possibilities there. And, differential attainment, we can really start to differentiate between different students' attainment and start to recognize some skills and abilities that are previously have been very difficult to measure. But how do we live with AI and work with AI and educate with AI? Again, I think we have to think very carefully, and we need to go back to this definition and think about the difference between artificial and human intelligence. So if you take something like ChatGPT, and this is just an example of a question I deliberately put into ChatGPT, that I knew it would come back with this kind of an answer, because that's what it's been trained to do. How are you feeling this morning? I could ask any of you that, how are you feeling this afternoon? You would be able to make an assessment of how you're feeling and answer that question. ChatGPT, AI, I'm a large language model. I don't have emotions in the way that humans do, but I'm functioning well and ready to assist you. So there gives you a first difference between artificial and human intelligence. What have you learned this morning? I asked ChatGPT. As a large language model, I don't have the ability to learn in the same way as humans do, but I'm constantly processing and analyzing data to improve language abilities and provide more accurate and helpful responses. But there's no awareness in these systems. There's no self-awareness in these systems. Whereas if we think about human intelligence, well, as humans, we have a really rich repertoire of intelligence that's way beyond the repertoire that AI has. So we have meta intelligence, if you like. So we are capable of metacognition, of thinking about our thinking, of being able to plan and regulate and then reflect on our thinking. Have we done well? Could we have done better? How could we have done better? We are capable of meta-subjective intelligence. So being aware, not just of developing emotional intelligence, but of developing that emotional intelligence. And we can become aware of how those with whom we're working are or are not developing their emotional intelligence. We have this subjective experience of the world, and we are able to reflect on it. Meta-contextual intelligence is a sort of intelligence I think we really underestimate. We as individuals move around the world seamlessly. Yes, when things go wrong, it gets a bit difficult. But, disrupted train journey, does it really stop us? It can be very frustrating. It might make us late, but we can replan very easily. We can go into different locations, interact with different people, use different resources, places we've never been to before, and we'll get by. Because we have this contextual intelligence and we have this awareness of our contextual intelligence. And this means that we really can develop very accurate self-perceived efficacy. None of this is available to AI. We also have social intelligence, and certainly AI can do a little of that. It can certainly mimic emotions and appear to interact with us in a social way, but of course it's not emotionally intelligent. Meta-knowing is sometimes used for metacognition, but in this example, I'm using it to talk about understanding what knowledge is. Where does knowledge come from? Realizing that knowledge isn't something that is just transmitted to us. It's something we have to construct for ourselves. And to be aware of our knowledge. Traditionally, we would refer to this as epistemic cognition, but that's a bit of a mouthful. So meta-knowing is a little more useful, I think. And then there's the interdisciplinary academic intelligence, and certainly AI is very good at that. And so we end up with a situation where, yes, AI can do the blue boxes, humans can do the blue and the orange boxes. It's just that AI has become really good at the blue boxes, which actually educationally means that we need to focus much more on the orange boxes and not just on the blue boxes in terms of our education. Now, one thought that I think we need to bear in mind as we look to the future of AI, and I think this is very, very relevant for education, is the extent to which we need to decide what kind of relationship we want people to have with AI. If we look at recent research, and there's an example here, and this is a paper from 2018, we know that our memory and the way that it works at the neural level is changing, the so-called Google effect or digital amnesia. We know that our navigation abilities are being reduced through the use of global positioning systems. And that once we become unable to complete these cognitive activities, we probably can't get them back, or we would have to spend years evolving to get them back. Now, maybe that doesn't matter in the instance of GPS and navigation. Maybe it does. But as we're now being offered far more sophisticated AI tools, I think we do need to think very carefully about what tasks we offload to those systems, because the cognition that we offload to those systems may be cognition that in 10 years' time we will be less able to complete for ourselves. So we need to be super careful and bear in mind that our brains are designed to be naturally lazy. And so if there is an AI assistant and there's the promise that, that thing you find really hard, that thinking that you find really hard, don't worry, I'll do it for you. And of course, as we've seen with ChatGPT, a system like a large language model is full of hubris. There's nothing it can't do. I mean, yes, it's been trained to say it doesn't have feelings and it doesn't reflect on its own learning, but ask it any question and it'll come up with an answer. It might be wrong, but it'll come up with an answer and be terribly confident that it's right. So I do think we need to think very carefully about what kind of relationship should exist between human and artificial intelligence. And I think education is the place where we need to be particularly careful, because we need to make sure we use the AI tools in the way that builds us to be smarter, not the other way around. The AI should serve us, not us serving the AI. And I think one way that really we can help with this is to help people understand more about artificial intelligence. So that means training staff, helping students to be far more aware, putting policies in place that make sure that within institutions there is a way in which AI is going to be used. So if we think about helping staff to understand what AI is, what kind of tools are available, how they might be used, what are the risks, what are the benefits, how do we do this properly in a way that really does bring the benefits? Awareness for students, again, they need to know what AI is, what tools are available, how they should be using it, what it will what impact it may have on their future. The world of work is certainly changing. A recent report this year from the World Economic Forum identified a set of skills that will be needed in the workplace, and estimated that 44% of people in the workplace do not have these skills and will need to develop these skills over the next decade. And a lot of this is largely due to the advent of AI. So we need to bear that in mind. And then, of course, we need to think about the policies, having an AI policy, and in particular, thinking about that in terms of equalities. And this is where I want to spend a little time on ethics, because I think ethics is super important when it comes to thinking about AI. And we can think about it in lots of different ways. Here are just some examples, which I will work through. So if we think about data privacy, we need to think about, if we're using an AI tool, what happens to our data? Who can access that data? What's the IP of that data? If I've entered in my essay into ChatGPT, is that my essay now, or does that belong to ChatGPT? Surely it's my essay, but ChatGPT is going to use that. So we need to be careful about these things. We need to be careful about personal data in particular. Often people use these tools, their data is accessed by the AI software, and they're not really aware that that data has been accessed. And some of it might be personal data that they don't want to be used. And we need to think very carefully if the users of the system are children in order to protect them, for sure. Of course, there have been lots of ethical concerns recently about students cheating using tools like ChatGPT. And so we need to think about what these tools bring in terms of how we think about our policies, how we support students to use the tools appropriately, how we support staff to ensure that students use the tools appropriately. Yes, of course, we need to help people understand how to spot when one of these tools has been used. And it's not simple. There isn't an automated tool that can go off and say, tick, yes, this is being generated by a Gen AI. That's not going, there's not an accurate one, and there's not going to be. So it's going to be much more sophisticated, the way that we need to sort this out. There's also issues about access, whether all students have access to these tools, because if some do and some don't, then obviously there's a clear inequality issue there that needs to be challenged. And then we need things to the rights of the child, and obviously we've got the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child that we can point to, and we need to think about that when we're thinking about AI, particularly when thinking about algorithmic bias. Often with these modern AI systems that use machine learning, in order for a machine learning system to operate, the algorithm that processes the data, that makes the software do whatever it does, will have been trained, or it will have learnt from millions of examples. But are those millions of examples representative of the people who are now using that system? So we've had a lot of examples of systems that have not been trained appropriately. probably the most notable was an Amazon recruitment system that only recruited male candidates, because most of the data it had been trained on was for male candidates, and therefore it looked for the kinds of characteristics that existed in male candidates. These things we need to be very careful about that when it comes to bias. And obviously we need to make sure that these technologies are age appropriate. All of this is ethical. All of these are ethical concerns. I often get asked about data and about privacy and about bias, all of which are super important. But one of the things that's often overlooked is the imperative of the AI. In other words, why is AI being used? What is the AI being used to achieve? So, for example, we could have two AI systems that collect exactly the same data, use exactly the same AI to process that data, produce the same results, but they're being used for very different purposes. So, for example, imagine a system a bit like the counselor that I described earlier, that collects facial expression data, voice data, pitch, tone, what's being said, in order to make an assessment of how engaged a student is in their learning. Same data, same processing, it outputs a score, say, or a report about how engaged each student in a class or a cohort or a year group or an institution is from this data. One organisation is using this technology in order to enable better support for students who are struggling. Another organisation is using this technology, or another company has built this technology in order to differentiate strong from weak students, so that the weak students can be weeded out and given an inferior education. Same technology. One, definitely not ethical. Other one, potentially ethical. Technology is the same, data is the same, imperative different. So we shouldn't overlook that. It's super important. Poor quality products. I'm actually really worried about this one at the moment, because there are far too many people setting up companies to use large language models, and I've seen some pretty poor quality products as a result. So I am worried about poor quality products. So I think, you need to be careful if you're thinking of bringing in a product to make sure that it really is doing something useful. It has been designed in an ethical way. It's taken on board the concerns that you have. The person who's trying to sell it to you can explain how it works, what it does, all about the data, all about how it's kept secure, everything that's going on. And you must feel confident that this is a tool that genuinely is going to support learning for your students, for you. You need to be super careful about spreading misinformation and, of course, reinforcing stereotypes. And key questions to ask are, well, has this been tested in an educational setting? So I do worry about poor quality products. And of course, many of them will have algorithmic bias and potential for spread of misinformation. I was looking at investment in AI products in general, not specific for education, just to see where investment was being made. And unfortunately, there's a significant amount of investment being used to develop ultra-realistic fake video systems. So, we need to be aware that these technologies are being developed. And so you will get a video that purports to be an expert in something that's basically a fake, and that can say anything and everything. And so these deepfakes are definitely being funded, as I say, not specific to education, but once these technologies exist, then of course there's a risk that they end up in education. And so we need to think about ethics, through these different lenses, through the individual classroom, institution, but the sector, as there are sector-wide implications as well. And so it impacts on all of these key stakeholders, all of whom need to have some thinking, processing, planning, policy making when it comes to ethics and AI. And so just to kind of sum up the situation, I think it's useful to think about AI and education through these three lenses. So think about the kinds of tools that you can use to tackle some of the big educational challenges that we face at the moment. Thinking about how we can help people. Second one, rather, is thinking about how we can help people understand AI. So there's one thing to use AI, A second one is to help people understand AI. Of course, that will help them use it more effectively. And then thirdly, helping people to, what I would say, reevaluate the education system. So yes, we have these tools that we can use to solve some of our big challenges. Yes, we need to help people understand AI so that they can reap the benefits safely. But the real big one is realizing that because we now have these AI systems that can do a lot of the things that we can do, but not all of the things that we can do, and we know that the skills the workforce is demanding are changing, we need to rethink education systems to make sure that we really do build them to support and help learners improve in the kinds of intelligent behavior that AI cannot do, and to be ready to work alongside AI in the workplace. So there are deep implications for what education is that go way beyond, can I use this tool to support personalized learning with my students, or how do I understand more about AI? All of these things are important, but I think that the profundity of that, what does the system need to be like because we have this AI, is the most important. The others are more straightforward. So it's important to bear that in mind as we think about this. It's also important to realize that the landscape is changing very, very quickly. So policy, frameworks, guidelines are being developed, particularly by the EU. There's something called the AI Act being developed by the EU. It should pass through the various different stages of lawmaking within the EU. I realise we're no longer part of the EU, but our regulation will be influenced by this, and it will influence many countries within and out with the EU. That is the most sophisticated of the regulatory frameworks being proposed at the moment. But all over the world, these frameworks are being developed. But also the products are changing really quickly. So here's an example. ChatGPT was released in the autumn of 2022. In April, they changed their terms of use. And it's really interesting if you just think about this small change. It's an important change. So at the moment, ChatGPT can, keep a long history of chats. They did introduce a change that meant that feature can be turned off. But this will happen again and again. The terms and conditions and features of the technology will change over and over again and evolve. So it's quite hard to keep in touch with what's going on. So what can you do? Well, you may or may not know, a few years ago, I founded the Institute for Ethical AI in Education with Santini Seldon and Priya Lakhani, the founder of Century Tech. And from that work, we produced a framework which is freely available from the University of Buckingham website to help people understand how they could introduce AI into education, the kinds of questions they should ask themselves, they should ask suppliers. And I think it's still a very useful framework. And as I say, it's freely available, so quite useful to you if you're trying to develop policies in this space. And just to take one particular example, which if we take the example of achieving educational goals, you can see there's an objective, which in this instance is achieving educational goals. There are some criteria that you need to address when it comes to thinking about this. So establish and specify the educational goals the AI is being used to achieve. And then a checklist. So you can use this framework as a checklist as you start thinking about building a policy, as you start thinking about, do you want to introduce AI with your students, with your institution? This can act as a guide and a checklist that can help your thinking. And as I say, it's freely available. And so I just wanted to finish by telling you a little bit about EDUCATE Ventures Research, because we have quite a lot of free resources that you might find useful. So I'm a professor at University College London, but I'm also founder of something called EDUCATE Ventures Research. And we do 4 sorts of things. We provide training. We provide training for small companies in the education space to help them be more able to demonstrate the impact of their product or service. And we also provide certification around that. And we also provide training in AI for educators, continual professional development, and we provide training for companies to help them understand how to use AI within their business, even if they're not an AI company. It may be that they can use some AI tools to make their business more efficient. We also do research consultancy, and we have a series of services called Artisans of AI, which are designed to help organizations use AI to do intelligent analysis of their data, to learn about what's happening within their organization. And we also do thought leadership events, talks, and the EdTech podcast, which I'll say something else about. If you're curious, you can use that QR code to look at the AI training for educators. As I say, there's an awful lot of free resources. We do obviously provide paid for training, but there's a lot of free stuff on the website that you can access. I also host the EdTech podcast, and we'll be having a whole series of podcasts about AI in education. There are already a couple there that we've done, but there are more to come about AI in education. And there are also, I hope you'll get these slides afterwards, there are a whole range of services. And if you want to know more, you can always email hello@educateventures.com, ask your question, and somebody will respond to you. And I should also say that we have just launched a free newsletter called The Skinny on AI in Education. And that's a fortnightly newsletter. Again, you can go to the website, educateventures.com, sign up for it. And the objective of The Skinny is basically to help you understand what's happening in AI. And so we look at trying to demystify a particular sort of AI. So the first issue talks about ChatGPT. We look at something futuristic that we see coming along the horizon to give you some ideas about the sorts of ways AI might develop. We look at what's happening in terms of regulation, because that's obviously very important, and particularly from a safeguarding perspective. So we try and demystify the various different regulatory processes that are happening at the moment, and all of it trying to make it relevant to education, to try and look at what's happening and say, okay, well, what does that mean for education? So please do go and take a look at it. As I say, it's completely free. So see what you think. And I'm always very, very, very pleased when I receive feedback that maybe says, oh, I didn't find that article terribly useful, but I'd really like to know about X, Y, and Z. The newsletter will evolve, and it will evolve all the better if people say what they would like more of and what they would like less of. So I'm going to stop talking now, because I don't talk between 40 and 45 minutes, and I would be delighted to take questions. I hope you ask some questions. But as I say, if you haven't thought of a question now and you think of something later, you can always ping me an email, or indeed use hello@educateventures.com, and it will reach me. Thank you so much.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Rose. I also can definitely advocate for the EdTech podcast. I actually do listen all the time. So big fan, would definitely recommend to anyone who's interested. I often listen to it on the bus.
That's why podcasts are so useful, aren't they? It's just such a useful kind of thing. And actually, just on that audio, so I wrote a book called AI for School Teachers. I should have put it in the slides, actually, with a school teacher called Karine George and a colleague. And the publisher, Routledge, allowed us to record 2 chapters and make them freely available. So again, that's some audio that you can just download from our website. Won't cost you anything. Unfortunately, the book will cost something, but the audio of a couple of chapters is free. And again, it's useful because you can listen to it on the bus or whatever when you're doing something else. That's what I think audio is really good in that respect. That's why I like the podcast so much.
Oh, same. I'm absolutely hooked on podcasts. I'm pretty sure I listen to them about 8 hours a day. It's almost a problem. Brilliant. We've got quite a lot of questions that have come through.
Sure.
So I wanted to start with one. I'll do them slightly chronologically. So sort of starting back when you were explaining the difference between artificial intelligence and human intelligence. So we got one question about like AI's inability to have that meta knowing. Is that due to its own limitations, or is it due to like a lack of an appropriate data set, or I guess like a lack of sophistication? Is it something that could come in the future?
It is a fundamental underlying problem associated with the way machine learning works, because the the way machine learning works processes of millions and millions of data points, but they're distributed across a wide network. And so the learning happens, but there's no oversight, there's no meta level. Now, I suspect that over time, a combination of good old-fashioned AI and machine learning will be used to increase the extent to which AI can develop that meta-intelligence. What I can say is the extent to which AI is capable of any form of metacognition at the moment is so naive and so embryonic, we wouldn't even call it that in a human. That's where we are at the moment. But I think this question is a really good question because it's basic, as I understand, it's basically understanding is there will this ever be possible? Is it an underlying problem with the technology? The answer is yes when it comes to machine learning, pure machine learning. But I think there are ways of combining different sorts of AI. And this is where I think people who disparage good old-fashioned AI and say, well, that's not really AI, are wrong. Because no, it's not AI that can learn. And if you only want to include in the definition of AI systems that can learn, no, it's not. But it can be incredibly useful because the advantage of the old-fashioned tools is they're very transparent. So the problem with a problem with machine learning, which relates to this meta-intelligence point, is that the machine learning can't explain how it's reached a decision because it doesn't have that meta view. Now, the old-fashioned systems that were built on a base of rules, of course, you could track back which rules had fired and say, okay, this is why that decision's been made. But of course, those systems couldn't learn and there were many things they couldn't do. So I think, personally, as time goes by, we will see more of a blending of the different types of AI. But I think it's going to be a long time before you get anything human-like in this meta-intelligence. And for some aspects of meta-intelligence, personally, I do not believe we'll ever get there. Because when you think about meta-subjective intelligence, that requires consciousness. And we don't have any conscious AI systems. And nobody is anywhere near developing an AI system that's conscious. Of course, there are many philosophical debates about this, but it's not happening in my lifetime. And I don't think it'll happen in my children's lifetime either.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Rose. And then kind of just similarly on this thread of the difference between artificial and human intelligence, Esther asked whether, like, to say that we are AI aware, do you also need to be like aware of human intelligence and how that works? And then kind of as a follow-up asked, if so, and we're able to implement kind of human intelligence in schools to create student-teacher awareness, how can it be kind of, how would you go about implementing it and assessing it, this kind of human intelligence that students have?
Again, this is great questions. Absolutely. Part of being AI aware is being aware of the difference between human and artificial intelligence, because I think that helps you to understand what you can expect of the AI. Because I think once, for example, taking something like ChatGPT, once you realize that what the system is doing is basically taking bits of words and putting them together on the basis of probability, because it's been trained on millions and millions and millions of examples, but those bits of words have no meaning to the system. That technology has no conception of what those words mean in the real world. Then you start to realize, oh, that's a real limitation, because there's no understanding of how those words apply in the real world. You might type the word chair, but I have no idea what a chair is. And then you start to realize the limitations. And so if we start to understand more about human intelligence, it does help us to understand more about AI and what we can expect of it and how we can best work with it. I think that's particularly important with these AI systems that, as I say, are super confident and give the impression they can do anything and everything, which they can't. But they are very confident and give the impression they can. So I think, yes, we do need to move towards more teaching of these, what I would call higher order thinking. Let's call them higher order thinking skills, which as teachers you'll recognize, things like metacognition, things like self-awareness, things like being able to plan, self-regulation. I personally believe those are the things we need to prioritize now. Yes, of course, we still need the subject areas, but we need to start not just looking at how much somebody is learning history, geography, or maths. We need to look at how, through the process of learning those subjects, they are also acquiring these higher order thinking skills. And we need to start assessing those higher order thinking skills. And this is the really beautiful irony, is that AI is the tool that can help us do that. Because if we can collect huge amounts of data as people interact in the world, and we have AI systems that can start to identify how these higher order thinking skills are developing individuals, then we can start to measure what's previously been considered unmeasurable. So we can start to do that. Of course, there are ethical challenges in this area, and we need to be mindful of those. But yes, absolutely, we need to put much more emphasis on teaching these higher order thinking skills, and really importantly, evaluating them and assessing them, and making that as important as assessing the subject areas. And of course, the more you improve those higher order thinking skills, the better you are at your math, your geography, or your history. So they, it works to feed each other. So yeah, great question.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And then just again on kind of like that potential for AI in education, Shmuel asked, how can you obviously mentioned this idea of equality in education. What are kind of some of the examples that you think that the ways that AI can support improvement in this kind of education equality?
For so many years, I have believed that AI could be a brilliant force for helping us deal with inequality in our education systems, because it can provide personalized tuition. It's not the same as a human teacher, but imagine a child who has no human teacher having a personal assistant that they can talk to through a technology and start learning. That's a fantastic possibility. If we think about students who are struggling, again, to be able to have one-to-one tutoring with an AI, doesn't replace the teacher, but augments what the teacher can do and helps that teacher. And if that system is feeding back to the teacher, detail about how that student's progressing, then that can help the human teacher know better how to meet that student's needs. And as we get more and more sophisticated AI assessment tools, we will start to be able to look in detail at neurodiverse learners, for example, and see, diagnose that more quickly, work out what works, how to support those students. So I think there's huge possibilities, but we have to explicitly decide that that's where we're going to invest money in building the systems to do that. And that, of course, is a commercial decision. And so I see huge possibility, but I think I'm not sure I'm seeing the reality in the systems that are being built, because, of course, many of the people building the systems, not all of them, but many of them are, of course, concerned about making a big profit, and you make a big profit from serving the most number of users. So, yeah, but I'm hopeful. I'm absolutely hopeful, because there are a lot of ways in which we could really help support people. And also, just think about different interfaces. Just being able to talk to a piece of technology rather than having to use a keyboard, which is a huge barrier for many students for various reasons. Many forms of disability make that different. Again, that is a great way in. So there's lots of ways in which AI has the potential to really help equalize, to address individual needs. But it will be humans who will make the decisions as to how much we prioritize that. And we really must do that.
Definitely. Just a brief company plug. I won't talk long, but obviously Seneca, as I'm sure most people are aware, is like largely a free platform. Our mission is like a fun, free education for everyone. And one of the areas that we're really exploring at the moment is AI for accessibility, and using some of these tools to make the content that we've already got and that already exists more accessible for different learners. So like that includes like text to speech, translation, content summarization. So that's a big area that we're really invested in, something we're really passionate about and quite excited about as well. So that's something that we're investing in.
And you're so right. I mean, one of the really useful things that something like ChatGPT can do is summarize. So I have to say, those are the kinds of tools that I use the kinds of tasks that I personally use generative AI for is summarizing, pulling out key facts, translating, correcting grammar as well. You know, those kinds of things that can be very, very useful for different types of people.
Absolutely. It's something I wish I had during my university time, if it could have summarized a few articles for me. I think I would have saved myself quite a lot of time and energy.
Definitely.
To slightly change topic, just onto some of the more concerns around AI. I've got a couple of questions about this. First one is about data privacy. I thought it was an interesting one. Do you think that the data privacy concerns we have around AI are any kind of more or less prominent than other tools? Millie has said that she doesn't often read the privacy policy on most apps or websites that she uses. I must confess, I'm the same. And I think it was probably about 4 or 5 years ago now, but there was a big focus on like GDPR and these privacy policies and things like that. How different do you view AI versus kind of that previous / ongoing discussion?
Another great question. Yes, we need to be careful whatever we're doing, whenever we're giving our data, to be honest. I think the reason AI brings this into particularly sharp focus is because of the way that it can process this data and manipulate this data. So that's not true for all tools that you would sign and none of us read these things. You know, they're so long, aren't they? I mean, some of us read them because we need to understand them for other people, but you know, most people don't read them, you know, to be honest. Of course they don't. But I think the only difference here really is that because the data can be used and manipulated and combined with other people's data, it makes it more of a risk, not necessarily to the person whose data it is knowingly, but because it will then be used to alter the way the system interacts with somebody else based on your data, which you may not feel happy about. And so it's often one of the key problems is the lack of transparency. You just don't know what your data is going to be used for. And it might be something you fundamentally disagree with on ethical grounds, on philosophical grounds, on moral grounds, but you don't know that. And often when you do read the policies, you find that actually multiple people have access to this data and multiple people are processing it, and you don't know what half of them do. So I think that's why this makes it even more of an issue. But it is an issue whenever we give our data. It's absolutely true, Millie, definitely.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Rose. I'm aware we're getting close to 5. Do you have like 5 or 10 more minutes, just because we've got a few more?
I can do 5, but then I do have to go because I've got another session. Sorry.
Super. Thank you so much, Rose. Sorry, we've got lots of questions that have come through. Okay. I'll pick a few highlight ones. I thought this one was interesting, saying as a history teacher, I'm interested in how far AI can be used to support marking essays. In particular, how it like level of understanding, explanation or argument. Obviously, that's something you mentioned. You know, AI doesn't necessarily have understanding itself, but can it assess it?
Yes, I mean, so there's a big issue with using something like ChatGPT to assess an essay because you don't know what's going to happen to the data that's the student's essay that you put into the tool. So I would not recommend doing that at all. I think there are IP issues. There are multiple complexities of using a tool like that. But there are some good AI tools out there that have been designed specifically to assess essays, for example, and they're getting better. Some of them are really quite sophisticated in that they can start to track an argument. They can start to analyze. This is the interesting thing about AI. So if we take emotions, AI doesn't have emotions, but it's really useful for analyzing emotions. Do you see what I mean? The difference. And it's a bit the same here. So actually, yes, the tools that are available for marking essays are becoming increasingly sophisticated. Again, with any of these things, I would always have some human oversight because, you know, it could be that a student's done something particularly innovative or creative, and that's not something the system has been designed to recognize. So you need to talk to the people who've built these systems and ask, you know, how does it work? What features and characteristics of the essay are taken into account? But the good companies will be able to explain that to you. And I think it is an area where we're improving. We're definitely improving on that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And we'll call this the last one because I know you've got to go. This one's from Joe, asking about this idea of like measuring the unmeasurable from the question you answered earlier. Is anyone researching this area at the moment? Is this something that's kind of already in discussion, or is it a little way?
Yes, we are actively researching it ourselves, actually, at EDUCATE Ventures Research. And, you know, if you watch out, we'll put some stuff in the newsletter as we do more and more of it. There are a variety of people. There's a very active area of academic research looking at this. You know, if you look at the Harvard Project Zero thinking routines, for example, that's an example of research in this space, but it doesn't use AI or data science to evaluate or in the formation of those, although I do think they're excellent, I have to say. But what we are now able to do is take data, you know, and say, okay, to what extent, you know, is this student evidencing that they are developing better self-awareness, better self-regulation? There's a very active research area within academia looking at that, and some commercial companies, and it's certainly an area that we do research on, and we'll make, when we have something interesting to say, we'll put it in the newsletter and make it freely available. But absolutely, it's an active area of research.
Oh, brilliant. That's a really exciting place to finish on. Thank you so much,
I
Rose.
think so.
Sorry to those of you who we haven't been able to answer questions for, but I think like Rose mentioned, if it's okay to email you with any questions they'd like to dive into in a bit more detail. Perfect. What we'll do is we've obviously got everyone's email who's signed up, so we'll email you tomorrow with the slides and a link to Rose's website and things like that, so you've got all of those contact details, and anything else that you'd like us to send out, basically, Rose, we'll pass on to everyone.
That's great, thanks, and thank you so much for the brilliant questions. I love answering questions, and it's always very, very helpful to me to get the questions, because it gives me great insight into the sorts of things that people are concerned about. So thank you so much, and thank you, Amelia, for hosting and inviting me. It's been a real pleasure.
It's a pleasure is all mine. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for giving up your Tuesday afternoon. Yep, that is the day. Tuesday afternoon to join us. And have a lovely rest of your week. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.